The ambitions of this grouping of countries has grown. These regimes are already reshaping the world to their preferences. Vladimir Putin and Xi Jinping have come to a meeting of the minds on some very fundamental things about world order. They are planning on staying in power as long as they are able to do so. China playing this overarching pivotal role logistically, economically, and otherwise. Most observers would think that would sound completely outlandish, certainly from the vantage point of 10 or 12 years ago, but it's exactly where we are today. So it's a fair question to ask about the balance or imbalance in the relationship. I think it's fair to say that Russia is a weaker and even junior partner in the relationship. But at the same time, Vladimir Putin and Xi Jinping have come to a meeting of the minds on some very fundamental things about world order and about their interests. And therefore, I don't think it's too important to get hung up on the exact degree of the power relationship there, because I think they've accommodated each other where Putin needs China, its support in its war against Ukraine, its support in propaganda terms globally, and China benefits from having Russia absorb resources and distract the West by enabling Putin to continue his fight in Ukraine, for example. Well, I think the top leadership in Beijing and Moscow have come to something like a meeting of the minds. I call it a shared consciousness that they've arrived at. I'm not sure that's the case across the Russian elite and certainly all parts of Russian society. I think there's deep unease with the idea that Vladimir Putin is essentially mortgaging Russia's future, at least in part, to China. And so, how this plays out over time, especially as Russia's economy is stressed and stretched, which it is now a militarized society, which is primed and poised to wage warfare for the foreseeable future. I would say not just in Ukraine. This is clearly the way the Russian system is now oriented under Putin, but it's not a guarantee that this is the linear way in which things evolve. It could be that the Russian system buckles, or that there are imponderables that hit the system in the foreseeable term that could change the relationship between Russia and China. And in that case, you may have parts of the Russian elite potentially that look for a different course that doesn't essentially sell Russia's interest to China for the longer term. Well, to the extent that quote is accurately portrayed based on the conversation between Xi Jinping and Putin, um, it's hard to know exactly what Xi Jinping would have been communicating there. My guess is that his own information, intelligence, and understanding of Ukraine's quite formidable resilience and response, including now hitting Russia's energy infrastructure hard. That energy infrastructure, of course, is fundamental to Russia's ability to wage warfare against Ukraine, to continue its unprovoked attack, which is now in its fifth year. And so Ukraine is proving to be quite innovative and quite resilient in the way it's both holding Russia back from Russia's ability to encroach further into Ukraine on the one hand, but most recently showing an ability to adapt and innovate in ways that are now bringing the fight to Russia. This clearly has gotten Xi Jinping's attention, and I suspect in his own calculation, realizing how much he's cast his lot behind Putin in the fight against Ukraine, which is crystal clear now. There's no neutrality there. China, by all accounts, is providing spare parts, military support. China itself is learning from the war in Ukraine, and it's widely understood that China has military advisors and observers there to watch this modern warfare that's underway. And so this, I think, is also an indication to China's leadership that the bill could become even more expensive for them as Ukraine finds ways to bring the fight to Russia. So I think with hindsight, it has become clearer that the actions of the leadership in Beijing and Moscow at the time, and this was when Xi Jinping ascended to the top leadership role in China, and it was at a time when Vladimir Putin returned to the Russian presidency after he spent 4 years as prime minister while Dmitry Medvedev held the president's post. And it's very clear now, looking back at that period of time, that even if there wasn't coordination between Russia and China, that the leadership, Xi Jinping and Vladimir Putin in those respective countries, were becoming far more ambitious and aggressive in their approach to the world. In Russia's case, it was soon after Putin's return that he annexed Crimea and invaded eastern Ukraine. And in China's case, it was also very clear that the level of aggression that was occurring in the South China Sea, around the Philippines, the encroachment and intimidation of Taiwan was growing. And so here we are a dozen years later, with far more interaction, I would say collaboration, not just between China and Russia, but also North Korea and Belarus and Iran. And so the ambitions of this grouping of countries, I think, has grown. And in the case of Taiwan, this is a democracy whose system should be respected, its sovereignty should be respected. Xi Jinping has made it clear that he is keen to subjugate this country, whose model and performance, I think, should be recognized by the free world. And if anything, the authoritarians, including Vladimir Putin, would have no compunction about providing support at different levels for China, the PRC's ambitions. I think this is a wake-up call to the United States and its natural allies to make sure that any messages or signals that are sent relating to Taiwan are crystal clear, so that the deterrence messages are understood clearly by Beijing. They have been working on their vision for how the world should be ordered for quite some time, at least since this 2012 date when Putin returned to the Russian presidency and Xi Jinping became the general secretary of the Chinese Communist Party. Um, I would argue that their engagement in the information and media domain, just to use one example, is a terrific way to understand how these regimes are already reshaping the world to their preferences. This is to say that states and officials are the exclusive voices for understanding the world. Independent voices are not welcome. In China's case, the authorities there go out of their way to marginalize, suppress, and censor alternative voices, while at the same time, the Chinese party state will fund and support voices globally that ultimately are channeling the preferences and top order narrative points that align with Beijing's preferences. At the same time, both of these governments censor domestically within their own systems any alternative voices, and they are keen to see that framework and that sensibility animate the wider world. I think we're at a point where the transatlantic democracies, natural allies in East Asia and elsewhere, need to really focus intensively on defending free expression from what are hands down the largest global threats. Just to use this example for how China and Russia are reshaping expression norms, and really focus on the way in which these ambitious, well-resourced regimes are seeking to crush free expression both within their own borders and beyond it. It's actually a huge opportunity for free societies to focus on what these regimes are doing and to take steps to rebuff it. So I'm skeptical that the U.S. and Israel and others who properly would like to see the wretched regime in Tehran gone. I'm skeptical that the authorities in Beijing and Moscow will lend a helping hand to this effort. As you rightly note, Russia has a close relationship with the regime in Tehran. China also has considerable equities there. And I think we have to be mindful that they will not rush to provide assistance in this instance. And if anything, we can look to the behavior of China as it relates to Ukraine, which clearly it sees as a way to distract and drag resources from the West. And I suspect, at least at a top order level, this will be a serious consideration of the authorities in Beijing as it relates to Iran, even if the price of oil and the choking of the Strait of Hormuz causes some discomfort to the authorities in China. I think they are keen to see if they can exert even more discomfort on the U.S. and the West in the meantime. So I'm cautious about using the term mediator as it relates to China. I think it's pursuing its interests from the vantage point of a one party dictatorship. And I think it's really important for outside observers to keep this in mind as they think about it. It's also worth noting that in the case of Xi and Vladimir Putin, they have met something like 50 times in person and virtually since 2012. And so this is an ongoing framework of communication and interaction that they have, where those leaderships, I think, have built a quite deep understanding of their own interests. How Beijing uses its role as a host for these meetings substantively, I think you have to keep a keen eye on this. I think it will be not be something that redounds to the benefit of free societies. I put it that way. Well, I think it tells us what is staring us in the face, which is that they are planning on staying in power as long as they are able to do so. And if somehow medical innovations or scientific breakthroughs allow them to remain vertical for the longer haul, they will stay in power that much longer. I think this is something that all of our societies need to take on board, that systems where leaders intend to be leaders for life will seek to pursue their ambitions. And in the case of Russia and China, these ambitions have implications not only for their own people who do not get a choice to choose their leaders or to contest policies or approaches of these governments, but increasingly in an integrated world, their longevity impacts all of us as we're experiencing right now. And so, while they may have been half joking in that conversation about their desire to identify breakthroughs that would allow them to live to 150, I think we have to take deadly seriously their intention to stay in power as long as they can and without any uh, limit on their own ability to remain there and exercise power. So I think there are of course limits. This is not a boundless relationship. I don't think the Chinese authorities would feel comfortable signing blank checks for Putin. But in a sense, that isn't the choice they have. I think if we look at the patterns and the evidence, certainly of the last 4 years or so, China is willing to invest a considerable amount of political, material, and propaganda resources towards supporting Russia. Certainly, enough logistical, economic, and informational support to enable the Russia's war against Ukraine to continue. Many believe that Russia would have been hard pressed to continue it certainly at the level it's pursuing the war, absent Chinese support. So, in this respect, China's support has been pivotal, even indispensable. But I suspect if Russia really were to be on the brink of collapse, that the Chinese leadership would have to make some serious judgments. And in fact, the comment that you alluded to earlier in our conversation about what Xi Jinping may have said to Donald Trump about Putin regretting the attack on Ukraine, that may be a signal to some of the concerns and things that may be keeping Xi Jinping up at night, given Ukraine's remarkable resilience and innovation in bringing the fight to Russia. And I would say by extension to China, because in a sense, China is using Russia as a proxy to wage war on Europe. And this is something that Europe needs to take on board as well. So that's hard to say if that were the basis of it. I suspect the embarrassing circumstances under which that parade was held, with clearly the Russian authorities being seriously concerned about um, Ukraine's ability to impinge on the parade. The very fact that there wasn't much military hardware to showcase because this is either in the fight or has been destroyed by Ukrainian forces. I think this is very telling. What precisely had Xi Jinping reflect and then elect not to take part? Very hard to say, but my guess is that he saw the scant participation and decided that this wasn't the event for him. In a way, with the benefit of hindsight, if we look back a decade ago and we were to imagine well in advance of the full-blown war in Ukraine and hostilities and war in Iran, that you would have um, Iran providing thousands of drones to Russia in a war on European soil against Ukraine, that you would have Belarus as a staging area for the same war, that you would have North Korean troops fighting alongside Russia and learning methods of modern warfare and providing ammunition to Russia to fight against Ukraine. And then finally, you'd have China playing this overarching pivotal role logistically, economically, and otherwise. Most observers would think that would sound completely outlandish, certainly from the vantage point of 10 or 12 years ago, but it's exactly where we are today. And in a sense, you have a constellation of authoritarian powers that are working together quite significantly with Russia to attack Europe through the attack in Ukraine. And I think we have to reflect at this point very seriously about um, what it will require from free societies to defend themselves and ensure that this collaboration among the autocracies doesn't carry the day. And now that we are almost, we're in the fifth year of warfare on the European continent that Russia is waging in partnership with its fellow autocracies, this, I think, is a question that we have to take much more seriously across the free world.